All right. Hi, and welcome to The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist. My name is Corey Johnson, and this is the show where I talk to a variety of people about current events and political philosophy sometimes, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Um, Today I'm joined by Robert Evans, host of Behind the Bastards and a variety of a million other podcasts at this point.
Yes, yeah. Too many
And
podcasts.
yeah, like, uh, so I know you're kind of the go-to guy for a lot of people on fascism and like the rise of fascism in the U.S. right now. But
I
I want to get,
appreciate being the go-to guy on fascism.
yeah. Well,
Mhm.
I read David Nyworth's book, The
Newark.
Rise. Yeah, Newark. Yeah,
Yeah. He's great. Yeah.
yeah. I read his book a while back, and then I interviewed him that year. I think it was 2018. And yeah, so then I've been following that, the people to follow on fascism in the United States and Canada for the last couple of years. But I wanted to talk to you about uh, how you got to the philosophy you hold now and what your views are, kind of thing. Um,
Jeez.
yeah, it's a big question, I guess.
You know, I was raised very conservative, which I talk about a fair amount. My parents are still both pretty right-wing. I don't know if they voted for Trump this time. We're not on the best of terms, but they voted for him the first time. They're Reagan Republicans,
Okay.
so I grew up, and it's weird because like people expect, because of how into guns and stuff that I am, that like that was a big part of my childhood. And I did start shooting when I was young. I grew up on a little farm in Oklahoma, and my uncle taught me. I was maybe 6, 7 when my uncle taught me how to shoot, and we had to clear a pond out of these invasive snapping turtles and shit. And I cleaned deer and all that stuff. But like my parents never owned a firearm. And it wasn't really like I would do it at camp. I would do it with my uncle. Their conservatism was not, what it has become, which isn't to say that it was, markedly less toxic, but like gun culture wasn't really what it is now back then. And
Right.
conservatism was like it was taxes and shit for them.
Yeah.
And that started to change in my late teens. Fox was always on. The Iraq War was a real turning point for a lot of that stuff.
Okay.
And it started to get more performative and more culture war-y the older that I got. And yeah, I bought into all of it pretty hard. I think a big thing for me in terms of getting out of it was I did speech and debate as a kid. I was a very, very good speech and debate student. Like I got to nationals in Philly one year and stuff. But it was just kind of like, one of the things that speech and debate does, there's a lot of problems with it, which is why so many quote unquote debaters like Ben Shapiro are such a
Yeah.
toxic part of our national discourse at the moment. But one of the good things that the debate does is that if you're going to compete, you have to create the best affirmative and negative case you possibly can for each argument. And
Mm-hmm.
we would have arguments that would kind of break down on a right-left line, and I would agree like with the right wing sort of take on it, but that would always be the harder argument to make. Like, and so that was a part of it for me, is like, why is it so much harder to make a good argument for the thing I believe?
Right.
But it's a
That's a
mark
good
of the
point.
amount of, yeah. And the big thing for me is when I moved away to college, I wound up befriending, and I started dating a woman who was an indigenous woman. It was the first person that I ever had like a serious relationship with. And our friends, people I would like play D&D with and stuff, or like one of them was a Mexican American, and I had never, my school was actually very diverse. Plano, Texas is super diverse, but it's mostly like the dominant like non-white folks who were in my school were like Southeast Asian, a lot of Indian students, a lot of Korean,
Okay.
Taiwanese, Chinese. I didn't know a lot of Hispanic or Black kids growing up. And so going to college, I started to meet those people and started to talk to them about their experience about like stuff with law enforcement. Because I was in college initially to get a criminal justice degree. I wanted to be in the FBI at one point. And it was just sort of a process of hearing the way that like stories from their lives, and just kind of reading more and experiencing the world more, that by about age like really before I was 19, I no longer considered myself conservative. Now I was libertarian for a couple of years because right around that period, I discovered drugs. And I started buying guns. So for a couple of years there, I was a libertarian, but I was a like whatever you want to do is fine. Also, drugs and guns should be unregulated, and it kind of things. Yeah. I'm still more or less there in some ways. I just don't like what libertarians believe, and I'm a big, again, having friends who were disabled, who had significant long-term health issues, convinced me of the need for some sort of robust healthcare infrastructure and safety net and stuff, and. That was kind of I guess that's the journey in broad. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Do you mind me asking how old you are?
32.
Okay. So you're still quite a bit younger than I am, but I can recall, my dad has always been a conservative as well. But in Canada, it was Brian Mulroney was the prime minister that he was like on board with all that, conservative stuff. And I also never ever was had guns in the house. We had one gun. We lived on a farm, and it was for shooting rodents, right?
Yeah it's your vermin gun. It's snake guns, and you have your I actually am a big fan of like very specific kinds of firearms. I had like a little wading snake gun when I was younger that was nice. It would send shells flying out. It was a little like 20 gauge, and it would send shells just like flying out when you break it open. The gun weighed maybe like 1.5 pounds, little pistol grip shotgun. And it would like, whenever people shot it for the first time, they would open it and they would hit themselves like right in the face. It'd make them bleed and stuff. And I would never warn people because I'm a fucking sociopath.
Because it's funny.
Yeah, it was very funny.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, no worries. It's so I can kind of relate a little bit to that kind of like being raised conservative, but then somewhere along the line switching teams almost. I guess so about libertarianism, where did you what made you veer off from that?
In some ways I never did. I think a big part of like what was actually going on is I was mistaking. I think in some ways, once I became a person, and you're not really a full person as a kid, right. Once I became a full person, I was kind of always an anarchist. I just didn't really know what that was. And libertarian, within sort of the structure of the world as I knew it, libertarian was the thing that made the most sense. And I am like, if I were going to like, if I were going to like say like what do I think the world should be like some sort of libertarian socialist kind of structure makes the most sense, and I think is the thing that also I can point to. People have done it, and millions of people live under some variant of this, and right. Clearly this system can be made to work in certain ways, and like let's give that a shot. That would be I'm very practical about like because for me there's a difference between kind of not what I advocate for others and what I advocate for myself, but like what I'm comfortable with and what I think can be done on a larger scale, right? Because like personally, to be entirely honest, if it's just me, I would rather live out in the middle of nowhere with a small group of people and like fuck roads and fuck a healthcare system and fuck any of that. But like I don't advocate that for society because that's
right.
Like I'm a robust, healthy, like young white male. Like I'm willing to like go roll the dice. I don't have any fucking kids. Like I don't care if I get caught in a bear trap or some shit. Right. I just hate being around lots of people. But I don't advocate that for society, because then you wouldn't have a society. You'd have warring tribes or cliques of people in the woods shooting each other, which is probably not a good call. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe smaller communities might not be a way to go, but yeah.
I think smaller interlocking communities with the odd city that I think would be smaller than cities are now, but acting as sort of like a trading hub, and you have a lot of regional autonomy within those areas. One of the things that I thought about in Rojava a lot was, and this is kind of a dicey thing to talk about because it doesn't really make anyone entirely happy, but one of the things they do over there, you have the self-administration, which is an extraordinarily progressive ideology behind it. And you also have them being, through necessity, working with and fighting alongside people who are like, we would consider them religious extremists, very conservative
Right.
Muslims and such. And like Yazidis are also a lot of like, that's a very conservative religion in a lot of ways. And so they have had to find a way to integrate this and kind of thread a very difficult needle that the needle that has to be threaded is, we need these people on our side. We don't want to fight them. We can't really afford to just fight them. We want them fighting alongside us. They believe things that are anathema to us. But also we believe they have a right to live their lives the way that they want. How do we thread those needles, not let them oppress people, but not oppress them ourselves?
Yeah.
And in America, we decide to just shout at each other and spend years on the verge of a civil war over it. It's one of the things they do over there. And there's definitely valid criticism to the system, but it makes a lot of sense to me. You have these things, the women's houses, that like, okay, you guys are a patriarchal, very conservative, religious society. You get to be that, but you have to have this building where if your women don't want to fucking do that shit, if they decide they're not happy, they go there, we take them somewhere else, and they get to do like whatever the fuck it is they want to do. And I think that could be in a situation where you see things break down, assuming things break down more than they already have. I think that could be one way to avoid fatal conflicts between communities that are religiously conservative and communities that are progressive, I don't know how likely that is, but it struck me as when I was over there having it explained to me, I was like, oh, that actually might work.
It's a knife's edge, right? But but yeah, it can work, but it's that narrow balance
it's not pretty, and everyone wants to say no, like, things should be like, and they should be, right? Like, people shouldn't live in societies where you're oppressed based on your sexuality or your gender. But if the alternative is a giant gunfight, or like people who want to leave that conservative society can and we'll take care of them, that one seems better to me than giant gunfight. But I'm not a huge fan of gunfights.
Right.
Yeah.
People get hurt in those.
Yeah, they tend to. That's kind of the downside of gunfights. Look great on camera though. Holy shit.
Yeah. I guess this isn't really in line with where we were going with the conversation, but I've often kind of thought that the American gun culture was by and large a product of what they see on screen.
Yeah. Yes, it absolutely is.
Very much action movie oriented.
Well, and it's not just America. Do you know who Tim Hetherington was?
Doesn't ring a bell.
So I talk a lot about Sebastian Junger, who's probably my favorite journalist. He wrote a wonderful book called Tribe that is just a masterpiece. And he's a very experienced war correspondent. He's done like a lot of work in Africa, which is like, if you report on wars, like reporting from like Liberia, the Congo, that is as intense as it gets in that field. So and his partner for years and years was this photojournalist, Tim Hetherington. And Tim was killed in Libya at the start of that civil war. A mortar clipped, I think, his femoral artery. It was a very sad story. But the piece he was there to do is when the fighting started, he was looking at the very first pictures coming out of Libya of these young men, 18, 19, early 20s, with guns for the first time, who hadn't been soldiers before largely. And he was looking at the way they held themselves and the way they dressed themselves and the way they were posing for the cameras. And he was recognizing specific movie posters. Right. And that's the thing he wanted to go over there to shoot, because like it was this generation who had been raised on a lot of Hollywood movies, because even in Gaddafi's Libya, you could get a lot of these, Schwarzenegger movies and stuff. For sure. And it was informing the way that they were going into this conflict. And that was kind of the thing he wanted to capture. And I've always felt that was a fucking good idea. He was a great photojournalist.
For sure.
Yeah.
You're actually like a legitimate journalist.
Yeah, every now and then, like not regularly, but as a hobby. Yeah.
So how did you get into that?
It was at Cracked. I got hired, and my boss then is the same as my boss now, Jack O'Brien. And, when I got hired at Cracked, it was just my job to like lay out articles, code them into the CMS. I would come up with like caption jokes under all the pictures. Like for years, if you like every Cracked article had pictures with captions, I was the one who did them. And then when he hired me on as salary, he just took away all of my work. and said, find something else to do, which is why
Well,
Jack is a great boss. And so I had to find something else to do. And I pitched this idea of like interviewing people and basically finding a way to take like journalism based around sort of like people's stories of their own lives and their jobs and experiences, and like turn it into list based articles. And so we did that. Like our first article was I talked to a guy who makes swords and knives for a living about like things
nice.
movies get wrong about swords. And that eventually led to me like having this kind of like we talked to drone pilots and a lot of really interesting shit. And the first thing I did that was actually real journalism was probably, well, no, I went to it was probably the Ukrainian revolution of 2014, the Maidan. And I wasn't there, but I spent 2-3 weeks talking to a couple of dozen people. I think by the time it was all over, just long Skype interviews, watching hours of streaming footage.
Wow.
From the front line, and I wrote a big article about it. I think that was my first real piece of conflict journalism.
Wow.
And the next year I actually went to Ukraine and reported from there. And the refugee trail when the Syrian refugee crisis really got bad, and then from there to Iraq, to now Syria,
And then Portland.
and then Portland.
I guess that's your new podcast, right? There's all about that stuff.
I've worn body armor in a few different parts of the world, but I've never had anything hit it until Portland.
Wow. Yeah.
Thankfully not bullets, but rubber bullets, but not serious bullets.
Good thing you had some on. Like that's
no, it'll fuck you up. Yeah.
Geez.
Yeah.
So in the line of anarchism, what kind of anarchist? I guess you said libertarian socialist mostly, eh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess there's a few different types of anarchists. Like there's
there's a fuckload of types. Absolutely.
Primitivists. I know a lot of people don't like. I've always I used to identify as like an anarcho-syndicalist because I'm very pro-union, very labor-oriented. But somebody pointed out to me, I think it was a YouTuber, Anarchopack, pointed out that anarcho-syndicalism is actually a step towards anarcho-communism. So sure. It's like, so I started labeling myself that way. But how does, I guess, your anarchism, like how is it informed, and how do you use it in your day-to-day?
Yeah, so I try to stay very humble when it comes to how I think the world should be. Like, I'm not an insurrectionist, although I'm not against insurrectionists, and there's a number of them I have a lot of respect for. I don't know what's going to work to beat capitalism, to replace it, to like fix everything that's hard. Like, I don't know, and nobody does. Exactly. Like that's kind of where I try to be. So when it comes to what I advocate for and what I push for and like what I do every day, the way that the way that my anarchism guides me is that I think you should always be, or that I should always be, this is the thing that I do, working at, if you can't tear them down, because you generally can't tear down hierarchies on your own, you should be trying to weaken them, right? Like going in, like if you see it as a bridge and just like drilling out little holes and hoping enough other people do it that it collapses one of those days. So that's kind of in a way what Behind the Bastards is doing, because it's been from the beginning. Both I wanted, I think there's a lot of history about colonialism in particular that's important for people to know, but kind of in a broader sense, the thing that I think the show really does well is it educates people about the ways in which dangerous people do tremendous damage to our civilization. And those ways, whether you're, a grifter selling drinking bleach or Adolf Hitler, the ways in which people do that to each other are all actually very similar. And when you study it enough, and I think this is one of the conclusions the show leads you to, when you study enough how people like that do it, the main way to make yourself more resilient to people like that, to the bad actors in our society, to the monsters, the main way to defend from them is to build a society where individual people are less able to hold power. right? Where
Right.
people have, and that there's a number of things that go along with that, including reducing what, if not reducing the amount of wealth people can have, reducing what wealth means.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's all about like, and I think that's, so that's really like what I try to do with that show is I try to lead people down a lot of the same intellectual kind of realizations that I had that led me into being an anarchist, in the hopes that like enough people will make the same decision. And if they don't, if they stay, you know, a Democrat or a Trotskyist or whatever the hell they are, like I don't care what you are, like I'm,
Right.
then they at least come away a little bit more resilient to scam artists, to cult leaders, to authoritarians, to like
Right.
to the fucking predators in our midst, right? That's part of the goal. And I think that making people, even if they never consider themselves anarchists, making people more resilient to predators is anarchist praxis, you know?
Yeah, that sounds really good to me. I've have you found like any like pushback from people on the left who are more pro-authoritarian or more
Oh, you know, only on Twitter. I actually had a wonderful moment at a Portland protest last year. So before like the protest, everybody knows, just one of the Proud Boys were rallying late 2019, and a couple of thousand people showed out to like flip them off. Basically, there were a couple of little fights around the edges, but I wasn't particularly close to them that year. It was just like a whole thing. And I was like standing under an overpass where this like line of people is screaming at the cops, and there is this like little young woman, but I don't actually know if she was an adult. Like she very well, just judging by sort of the size and her voice, she might have been like 14 or 15.
okay.
And she looks up to me and she says, "Are you Robert Evans?" And I say, "Yeah." And she says, "I like your podcast." And then she pauses a beat and then says, "I wish you were more radical." And yeah, I enjoyed that
Okay.
a lot. Like, yeah, you know, but I've never had like the like I on Twitter and shit, like I have tankies and stuff come after me from time to time, but like it's Twitter, you know. I've
Yeah,
never run into those people in the
in
wild.
real life.
Yeah. Even when I've met people in real life who are like Marxist Leninists and stuff, like it's generally I meet them because they're like, you know, feeding people at a riot, and I'm filming, you know, or whatever, and you know, we're on the same side. Like as a general rule, I think the kind of I like not to downplay the dangers of some aspects of sort of the regressive left, because I do think there's some real concerns in terms of like harassment and stuff. I just don't run into them a lot in the actual
Right.
world.
That kind of makes me think like I've talked to I've got a few friends who are like they consider themselves Marxist Leninists, or even a
Yeah, and
couple
that's
people
fine. Sure,
who are like they're kind of on the tanky spectrum a little bit, or class reductionists or what have you. Um
sure.
but one of their main things is they really hate identity politics. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering like
Okay.
what
Yeah.
is your take on quote unquote identity politics?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things I think about that. One of them is you can't reduce everything to identity politics, but you sure as hell can't pretend that it isn't. God, I think
It's a trap.
if you are it's hard to like phrase this in a way that doesn't sound kind of like if you are not down to fight for trans people, to fight for Black liberation, to fight for Indigenous liberation, um, to fight for, you know, liberation of migrants, open borders, then like, how are you on my fucking side? You know, that's where I
I
am
think
on
that's
that. Like, I
fair.
don't know.
Yeah.
The term identity politics is a bunch of different fucking definitions. That's how I feel. Like those are
Yeah. No.
all of those fights are part of the same fight.
Yeah.
And they're fighting against the same thing. And that doesn't mean that like the tactics are the same, because they are all like they're different sets of problems and stuff, but like they're all the causes of all of those things are broadly speaking the same system, which needs to you know, Minecraft, whatever. Like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
We need to do something about
Yeah. Some ought to be done about that.
it. Yeah, if only.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess I'm kind of shooting random questions at you
Sure.
here. What actually initiated Behind the Bastards?
I've always been just a huge fan of Hitler, like just a big Hitler stan. Yeah.
Oh
Um,
yeah, that's
yeah.
good.
I dropped out of college. I never graduated because I started working as a writer, and I just said like, well, this is the only thing I ever want to do with my life. What's more college going to do for me to get me more debt? But the thing that I did like about college, the only classes that I liked in college that I got something out of, is I was on the track for a degree in Holocaust studies.
Okay.
Yeah, and I loved those courses, particularly the ones on the Holocaust in the media and how it's represented. But I've always been very fascinated by the Holocaust. And as a result, also very interested in the Nazis. And like, for years, my career didn't really intersect that much. I'd write every now and then. I wrote a couple of articles. Like I wrote an article for Cracked years ago that was kind of like a proto bastards article. It was like weird facts about the Nazis that talked about like Hitler and his bullwhip and his
Oh, okay.
like stuff like that. And it talked about Karl May, his like love of that weird German fantasy author. But I just kept finding myself like obsessed with this stuff and like reading obsessively like different like I would read different. I think I've read all of the big biographies of Hitler. um and I've read a lot of different books about like I read Rise and Fall of the Third Reich I don't know how many times, which is a great book still. You have to the guy who wrote it, Shirer, was a very very good journalist, somewhat homophobic, not out of step with the times, but definitely like he's a dude from who was writing in the 30s,
Yeah. So
like
definitely
yeah,
homophobic.
definitely homophobic, not like in a, again, not aggressively for the time, like not like an exterminationist kind of dude, but
Okay.
just like kind of what you'd expect from the time, but a very skilled journalist who talked to Hitler, interviewed all of these different figures, and is an irreplaceable source on the rise of this. So I was obsessively reading all of this stuff just for years and years, and I never really knew why. And then, you know, 2015, 2016, it started to make sense. Um, and 2017, was when Cracked was kind of going downhill, and we were all trying, like, scrambling to make it work. And I took like 3 trips to Mosul during the
Okay.
fighting there, and my relationship with my wife collapsed, which was hard. It was just a horrible year. And I kind of started, as things started to level off near the end of the year, and I started to like be a human being again, I had this idea that I wanted to do a podcast series that was about the Nazis. And it was everything you don't know about the Nazis. And it was going to be like a 10 episode, 10-hour long mini series about all these incredible details that I'd learned over the years that I thought people needed to know. And, I was going in to pitch that to Alex Schmidt, who is our head of podcasts, on the day they let us
Okay.
all go. So I spent a couple of weeks getting drunk, and then Jack calls me and he's like, "Hey, like I'm doing podcasts now. Do you want to? Do you have anything to pitch?" And I pitch him the same idea, but this time I add like, so we'll do one season on the Nazis, and then I'll do a season about Saddam Hussein and his regime, and a season on Mao, and like that.
Right.
And there's actually now a new podcast, Real Dictators or something, that seems like basically my old premise. And
Okay.
Jack was like, that sounds good. Why don't you just do a different topic each episode? And you can cover all the same stuff over time, but like you can have more variety. And I said, yeah, sure. And turns out to be something people want.
Yeah, for sure. It's
Yeah.
it's the I guess it's one of those really good resources for somebody who just doesn't needs like a surface level of information. I mean, you go pretty deep and but it's also hard to absorb everything in
Yeah.
3 hours or 2 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah, and it's, I have my areas of strength and my areas of weakness. One of the things, I don't want to like give away future projects, but like I would like to be able to do a better job of covering, for example, Chinese history, Southeast Asian history,
Right.
which I'm never going to be the right person for, because there is, there's a there's a level of baseline understanding you have about a region's history. Like I have forced myself to learn enough about Africa that I can do the episodes that are set in different African countries that I have. But it's always the hardest episodes I write because I just even Latin America is easier just because I grew up in Texas and I've spent time in Central America and it's a bit more familiar to me.
Right. Yeah.
It's just so hard. That's why the episodes focus so much on Europe and on the United States and people from those areas, is because that history is just inherently easier for me to do. But like I haven't covered a lot of indigenous history in North America because it's very hard, you know. It's difficult for me, and it's not just that it's difficult, because it's always difficult. Like the episodes
Right.
that I write, it take a lot of research. I'm not convinced that I could do a lot of it well, and so that's some of the stuff we have planned for 2021 are kind of ways to fill those holes,
Oh,
and
neat.
also hopefully have it be someone who's like not me doing it, but in that same style. So these are some things that we have planned. We'll see
Okay.
what actually happens.
So
Yeah.
how fast do you actually read?
I mean, I can read if it's a 60,000, 70,000 word book, you know, if I make it a 6 to 8 hour day, I can read a book, you know,
Wow.
something like that.
And you can just
Yeah. I
sit and
mean,
read a
it's actually
book.
kind of a curse. Yeah. It's
Wow.
necessary, right? Well, when I was a kid,
I
like I said,
suppose,
I
yeah.
grew up on a farm, and I didn't have like I eventually got like a fucking Nintendo, but I didn't have one for a while, and we didn't have Cartoon Network, we only had Nickelodeon, so there would only be like an hour or two of TV a day, and I didn't really have friends because again, I lived on a cow farm in the middle of nowhere, so I just had a dog. And from an early age, my parents would just read to me all the time, and I started reading pretty young, and by the time I was like 9 or 10, I was reading like Michael Crichton was my first, like the first big books I read, like The
Oh, wow.
Lost World, and because I was super into dinosaurs and shit. And I just was, for the entirety of my life up to like age 18, 19, never without a book. And I would usually, if we were going out, like I was going out with my mom or something when I was a kid to go to like errands, I would usually have two books because I'd always finish one and I would be like miserable if I didn't have a second book to start reading right away. And so it was like a curse for most of my life because I would like be really into a book that I'd loved and then it would be over and then I would like have to find something else to read. But now it's become the only way that I can do my job. So I guess that's good.
Yeah, I guess it's a required skill, right?
Mm-hmm.
I I don't know. I used to, when I was a teenager, I read pretty voraciously, and uh, I don't know. Ever since I started playing on the internet, like so much, I cannot sit and read a book for more than 30 minutes at a time.
It's definitely had an impact, and I usually fiddle with guns in the middle of, like, you know, I'll pause every couple of pages and play with a bullet or something. Like I need to do something. I'll check Twitter. Like, it definitely fucks up stuff a little bit, but yeah, about a book a day if it's not a long book.
Oh, that's pretty impressive. Like I can't even remember the last time I read a book all the way through.
Yeah, ideally, if I felt like I could do it and I felt like I could responsibly do it and like what I was doing wasn't needed, I would like to just write fiction and nonfiction. I would like to put out like one book every year and not do anything else and live on a farm in the mountains and shoot
Just
trespassers.
right.
That's like
Yeah.
the dream. Yeah. So we'll
Did I
see. Yeah.
did I see on Twitter that you actually have a book coming out? Another one?
Yeah, I wrote a fiction book
Okay.
during my the year where I like almost died from PTSD. And I spent the year after that, it was 2017. I spent 2018 editing it, and then 2019 kind of just sitting on it. I'd go back at it every now and then a little bit later this year, like a couple of friends hounded me and I let them read it and they told me that I should put it out. And I don't really want to, like, I'm very grateful to Penguin who published my first book, and I really like the editors and it was a good experience, but it's very slow and there's a lot of contracts. I just don't want to deal with that. So I'm just going to put it out for free. I'll do like an audiobook version that'll probably be through iHeart and have ads and stuff on it, and then I'll just put up PDFs or EPUBs or some shit online.
Kind of like
You know,
the War on Everyone.
Yeah, well, that I did crowdfund first, and I'm just going to give this away. I'll probably put up a thing if people want to like donate so I can pay the artist and whatever, buy a house. I don't know. Like I don't I make enough that like I feel weird asking people, and there's a limited crowdfunding pool of money, and I have a lot of friends who make their money on Patreon. I'll probably have some sort of donation thing if people want, because it would be nice to, if I wanted to get a book deal later, be able to say this many people were willing to donate for this. Like that would be helpful. But I'd like it if I could set like a maximum donation cap, because that was the thing that really fucked me up about the war on everyone, was there would be people who would donate like a ton of money,
Mm.
and I felt awful about that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I needed it at the time. I was coming off of a year of living off my savings and basically not having any income, more like 15 months. But then I got a job very quick. Like I got hired as a salaried employee very quickly, and I didn't need it. And I felt bad that people who didn't have much had been donating to me, which is again why I'm kind of like, I would much rather take, like, obviously, like, it's capitalism. There's no perfect solution. I would much rather take a big company's ad money if I can, than have people who might not have a lot give me some of
Yeah.
what they have,
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I suppose as long as the ads are things that you're cool with, right?
Yeah, I have like a no list, right? Like I won't sell brain pills. Like we've had some offers, but like that was
You're
one of
not
my, when
Alex
I came
Jones.
in. And iHeart's really good about that. Like they actually
Good.
have, you get to fill out a form that you say like, what are you comfortable with and what are you not comfortable with?
That's good.
Yeah. So yeah.
I early on in the listening to Behind the Bastards, I noticed that you actually there was an episode on some medical grifter, and you
Hmm.
talked about uh, getting sources from like Skeptic's Guide to the Universe and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And I've been involved in the skeptical community for quite a while, so I was pretty. That was like a highlight of an episode for me.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, you run into some of these, especially some of these kind of less well-known grifters, the folks that like aren't super famous, and often like Rational Wiki or Skeptic's Guide, like those will be the best sources on that because somebody who has just made it their life's mission to expose this person has tracked down. That was a big
Yeah,
thing with one of the Bleach episodes. I forget exactly which it was, but it was some skeptic source where it was like, oh shit, like this person's crusade is fucking this guy up, and he's collected all this information. I better use it. Yeah.
yeah, that's like Jen Gunter, Dr. Jen Gunter. She was on.
Yeah. Yeah. She's great. Yeah.
Yeah, or she's made it kind of her life's mission in a lot of ways to debunk everything Gwyneth Paltrow says.
Yeah. I fucking love her. I love that kind of doctor, who is just like so filled with righteous fury at those sorts of grifters. It's very, very fun.
Yeah,
I always enjoy them. And I like the way they write. Because they tend to be good writers and they tend to be just furious. And it rules.
yeah, they don't take any they don't pull punches. They
Yeah.
call it bullshit when it's bullshit, and that's something that always drew me to the science-based
Yeah.
medicine and that stuff.
Yeah, I'm a big, like, I know I have some friends who really hate doctors, and some loved ones too, because they've had terrible, like, obviously most people in most professions aren't that great at it,
Right. Yeah, they're not the
um
experts, they're the average
yeah.
people.
Yeah. I had really good experiences with doctors as a kid because I was a sick kid, and I like doctors as a rule. Yeah, I think it's a good thing to do with your time.
Yeah, that was one of the things I took from hanging out in the skeptical community is what like when you have a medical question, ask your doctor. Don't ask Facebook.
Yeah, for the love of God, don't ask Facebook. Yeah.
See
And
far
it
too late.
changes. It changes again when you get like Twitter famous, because I can actually like throw shit up, and like then I'll get like a fucking doctor be like here's my credentials, like here's what I
Right.
think you should do. Which was, my ex-wife had some really significant health problems, and it was very helpful to be able to like, oh God, we're spending so long just trying to set up appointments. I want to actually talk to a doctor about what kind of doctors I should be looking at for this. And it was great to be able to just like get
Wow,
advice from somebody.
that's
Yeah.
actually a use for the one useful thing for Twitter fame.
Yeah, that and yelling at airline companies when they fuck up your
Oh
flight.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Hmm.
Actually, that's we're a little far afield here, but I've complained on Twitter about local businesses too. Well, not local, but SaskTel,
Mm-hmm.
and they respond. They always come back to you.
I'm guessing that's some sort of Saskatchewan telecom company.
It is so. That's our
Yeah.
Saskatchewan Crown Corporation. We have our main utilities are all technically government owned, but they are run by like separate corporations also.
That sounds like a perfect system.
It's interesting.
I mean, it sounds better than what we've got here.
Yes. Yeah,
But,
slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our driver's insurance has promised, like, over the years, they've guaranteed that we would have the lowest insurance rates in all of Canada. So
that's neat. Yeah, that's good.
And
hey.
that's something you can only do if you're the government.
Yeah. It was always interesting to me, and I spent a decent amount of time in Nova Scotia. The fucking government alcohol stores, like that was so fucking bizarre. Like having to like go to the government to get your beer and your liquor. I never quite got used to that.
Yeah, that's actually Saskatchewan was one of the last holdouts for giving contracts to private liquor sales.
Wild. That's the thing I think California's gotten right, is just if it's a store, it can sell liquor in California. That seems to be. I have no idea what the actual written laws are, but everywhere sells liquor in California, and it's wonderful.
When I was growing up, I had a friend who was from Washington, D.C., and he moved to Saskatchewan because his dad lived here. And he used to tell us stories about, you can, in the United States, you can walk down the street with your alcohol and all you got to have is a paper bag in it around it.
I mean, some cities, yeah.
Yeah. And we were all just marveled at it. Like, I mean,
yeah. I mean, yeah, we need to have more of a street drinking culture in this country. It's absurd that we don't. I think the virus is helping with that a little bit, because there was a point in which everybody was just drinking outside, like walking around with open containers, right. And the cops seem to have all decided, like, we're gonna let this fly. So I hope we can turn that into it's never made sense to me why you couldn't walk down the street drinking a beer. Like, who gives a shit? Like, yeah.
It really shouldn't make any difference.
No, like I get, one of the few things that I get not being able to drink and drive, even though it's super fun when you're not around people in the middle of nowhere on country roads. A hoot to be drunk driving a big fucking, oh my God, just getting wasted and driving a Jeep Wrangler in the middle of the woods is just such a good time. But
the favorite around here is half tons. Old half tons with like that are made out of steel.
Yeah. That does sound like a good time. Yeah.
Saskatchewan. I mean, this is again, that's like one of these things. Saskatchewan is still has the same drunk driving rate as we had 25 years ago. People here just keep doing it. I guess, I think that's part of the culture, is we kind of got, used to driving in the back roads and from buddy's place to buddy's place after a few beer. And
and it's again, this is kind of why municipalism makes more sense to me, because there should be different rules for different places, and I'm willing to entertain that. Like, there should be different rules about what kind of firearms are allowed to be carried in what ways, depending on what kind of situation you live in. Right. I think that one of the problems we have continuously in this country is that most of those big laws tend to be blanket rules about what drugs are, blanket rules about what guns are legal for everybody, blanket rules about this, about that. And it's like, well, but does it make sense for like somebody in fucking downtown Washington, D.C. to live by the exact same legal set as like somebody who lives out in the middle of fucking nowhere in like New York State?
Right.
Why?
Yeah. And actually, I mean, that's a big thing that rural people really hate, is that the laws that apply to the city get put on them as well. Like,
yes,
even with these restrictions about coronavirus and here, a lot of the people in the rural areas of Saskatchewan are pissed right off because most of our cases are in the cities, and they're like, well, why the hell do I have to worry about, this and that and the other thing?
Yeah, I mean, and we're getting a lot more in rural areas now. Like everything's a little bit different when you talk about viruses.
Yeah, that's right.
But in general, yeah, I think that one of the reasons that I tend to support the kind of changes I support is because I think that a lot of the violence in our political system is driven by people who are like, well, if they're in charge, they're going to tell me what to do. And that shouldn't be at stake. Like your daily life, like we should seek to have a system where as long as people's daily lives are like comfortable and healthy, nothing's at stake for them, really. Like we shouldn't have, like, it shouldn't be a thing where you're worried about your life radically changing because a different political party gets into office.
Yeah.
That's terrible. Of course people are talking about shooting each other.
Unless it's improvement, right?
Yeah. Like it's so weird that I mean, we're getting into this thing that I'm hearing it now from liberals too, where it's like, I don't know. I worry about like politics of revenge. We seem caught in that loop. And then it also seems like the people who aren't caught in that loop are going, well, we should like make up and embrace the Trump supporters. Like, well, no. Like there's actually, you cannot be spiteful in your politics and also not forgive people who were trying to do a fascism without making sure that they've changed,
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Anyway.
I guess speaking of fascism, when did you start like getting into that? I guess you said back when you were reading about the Holocaust, but when did you start like actually studying the stuff that's going on in the US?
I was always, I voted for Obama. It seemed like a pretty clear choice when Sarah fucking Palin was on the other ticket, right? And I was disappointed, like a lot of people were, about like the lack of meaningful change that we got. And I started to really, in the last couple of years of his term, understand how thoroughly broken the system was. Like I was never a big fan of his or of the Democratic Party. I never cared about them much or thought they were particularly good at what they were doing. Right. But the level to which the system was broken became increasingly apparent to me around 2014, 2015. And a big part of that was that like my day job for Cracked was just talking to dozens of people every week, sometimes interviewing them about their lives, about their jobs, about what they did. And the more I learned, the more broken it all seemed. And I also had enough historical understanding to realize that like situations like ours, where you've got this increasing gap between the rich and poor, where things are very unstable, and a lot of people live precarious lives economically, and you have disinformation like we were starting to see. Gamergate was a big realization for me of like how bad the disinfo ecosystem was. I just started becoming aware in like 2014, 15, like, oh, we're kind of, I think the conclusion I came to initially was like, no reasonably free country is ever more than about 4 years away from fascism, right? Within a capitalist system, at least. Within a capitalist system, at least. I think if you have a system that fundamentally addresses everybody's basic needs, you're a lot more resilient to fascism.
Right, yeah.
But we do not, and no one really does. Certain countries are better at it than others, but we're not good at it.
We're not as far away as we might like.
Yeah, and then Trump started to run. It was actually my colleague at Cracked, Adam Todd Brown, who wrote a really good and insightful article in I think it was 2015, comparing Trump to Hitler and calling his shot, saying, I think this guy's going to win the Republican nomination. I think Adam called it before pretty much anyone I'm aware of. And he was right. And it became increasingly clear to me what was happening. I went to a Trump rally. Like I talked, went kind of undercover and talked to some Trump fans and heard some pretty unsettling things. I remember there was an American who's a British person, but he'd come here and he was now a citizen. And I met him at a Trump rally, and we were just talking, and he's a huge Trump fan, and he was like, yeah, I think he's going to win in 2016 and he's going to win in 2020. And I said, well, yeah, what about it after 2020? And he said, well, he's got kids, doesn't he? And like, it wasn't a joke. Like, it was like this guy being like, I want to see this family dynasty completely take over American politics forever. And amazing. I mean, maybe he was British and he's got a little bit of monarchism kind of implanted in him. I don't know.
Right.
But it was like this, oh, this is gonna be a problem. And
This is a
that
real problem.
yeah.
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 Holy
So
shit.
I started reading even more, not just about like the history of the Nazis, but about like like Paxton and stuff, people writing about fascism,
So I guess in a sort of a way that brings us to it could happen here.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I guess for those who haven't already listened to it, that's your podcast about kind of what a civil war would look like in
Yeah.
America.
Yep.
And what do you think? Are you there?
We're not there. I was more worried earlier in this year. There were some moments
Mm-hmm.
this year where I was absolutely certain the shooting was going to start. There were moments where I was like, it could happen any minute. When I was out at some rallies where there would be groups of armed people yelling at each other, and it was like, well, this could be it.
Yeah.
Through a lot of people's very hard work and cowardice, thankful cowardice, things didn't go as badly this year as they could have. And that means that we have hopefully another shot to really pull our fat out of the fire, because we're not safe yet, because Biden won, we're not safe. It is, I think, broadly speaking, good, because it does give us whatever else more time. I think Trump would have, if Trump wouldn't have led to straight white outright civil conflict, I think it would have led to for one thing, a hell of a lot of murders of left-wing activists by right-wing activists without really the government doing anything about it. Plus another crackdown on the state. Anyway, I think we're still on a path that worries me, because you still have two sides that are heavily armed, and the left is increasingly well armed, which I think is broadly speaking good, because you don't want to be the only side that doesn't have fucking guns if things get bad.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
more to the point, you have a system where people's needs aren't being met, right? Like, the most worrying thing about this year is the Boogaloo boys. Not because I'm terrified of Boog boys, because most of them are, again, they don't actually want, they might think they want to fight in a war, but they don't really, and they make the choice to not, right? There have been a few
when it comes
who
to the
have really
moment.
wanted it. Yeah, there
Yeah.
have been a few who have really wanted it, and who have tried, and who have in some cases killed people or attempted attacks, and it didn't work. But the fact that the thing that's most scary to me about the Boog boys, about the Boogaloo movement, is not the individuals who have actually tried something. It's the fact that tens of thousands, and maybe even a couple of 100,000 Americans are still so enamored with the idea of fighting in a civil war against their government or against their fellow Americans. Because, like, what that means is there's this large and growing chunk of the country, enough to be like the fastest growing subculture in the United States, maybe. QAnon's the only thing that would compete with it. That's just dedicated to wanting this to collapse, because they feel like this society has so little to offer them. And that is a sign that your society has fucking failing, right? That this many people want it to collapse into violence. Don't like have a dream for how it could be better, but just want to blow it apart.
Yeah.
That's a very bad sign, and it's not going to get better because Joe Biden's the president, right? Because I don't think he's going to. I think there's a possibility that he and the Democratic Party could be pushed to making some of the meaningful changes that are necessary to improve people's material conditions. I don't think it's super likely. I don't think it's super likely.
I mean, you still have a lot of those, like you say, like red Democrats. They Joe Manchin will not vote for Medicare for all, stuff like that. So
no Medicare for all, like
no cancellation of student loan debt.
No. People seem to be talking at least more about UBI, but I think we're a while off from it. Fundamentally, we're dealing with this issue where we have built a culture around the wrong kind of individuality. The kind of individuality that like leaves people lonely and breaks them and turns them into something terrifying and something very sad. And that's where the mass shooters come from. That's where the Atomwaffen boys come from. That's where the Boogs come from. And
Right.
it's why, as an aside, it's why soldiers in the United States military suffer PTSD at a rate higher than soldiers in any other military and any other civilization, probably in history, ever have.
Yeah.
It's because it's a broken society. And it's going to have to die, right? One way or the other. My preference would be that it die peacefully and be replaced by something that's healthier and meets people's needs. But what we have can't keep going, and it can't just be patched up with duct tape. It needs to be replaced with something better. And I hope that that can be done in a way that doesn't mean a tremendous number of people have to die. Because again, I'm not an insurrectionist. I know what I've seen enough of war to not want that. But also the status quo can't continue, you know?
Yeah. I recently, recently listened to a podcast called Recall from the CBC, and they talked about the FLQ in Quebec during the 70s, and they were like essentially they were uh, attempting terrorist actions in order to gain Quebec independence and a socialist state and whatnot. And um, one of the things that I really took from that is that it is, in a sense, possible to carry out terror-like activities without actually harming people. But then you have the reaction of power that is going to almost always going to lead to more harm. And then I mean the FLQ, they ended up killing somebody. It
Yeah.
kind of cast the whole movement into the dustbin of history. But it
Yeah, I
was
mean, it's a shame that Hakim Bey is such a creep because poetic terrorism is actually a really important concept when it comes to kind of breaking people out of negative thought patterns and maybe putting them on new tracks of decisions. You know, I tend to be a big advocate of that kind of activism. You know.
there's yeah. I mean, I guess in the day of the FLQ, it was they could put out a pamphlet and it would get widespread and people would read it, and
Mhm.
if they could get their message out to more people. But now everybody's got a message on the internet, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to compete with so many differing narratives, I guess.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem we have, the most immediate problem that we have, even more immediate than climate change, because it's part of what makes it impossible to deal with climate change, is
Right.
the sheer what the internet and social media in particular has done in making it impossible for there to be any kind of broadly agreed upon standard of truth, you know? If there were a broadly agreed upon standard of truth that was based in scientific fact, we'd only be arguing about how to fight climate change, right?
Yeah,
Not
that's
about
right.
the need, and not about the imminence of the need. And I don't know how to do that without, Facebook servers sliding into the ocean, and then Twitter servers sliding into the ocean, and then,
Yeah,
um,
fair.
I don't know how to do that. But
And
it
even then,
feels
like the
inevitable.
damage is done, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, in order to reverse it, you first have to stop it because
yeah,
nothing that these companies do will ever reverse it, right?
yeah,
Because it's
that's right.
profitable for what's happened to continue happening.
Well,
Um,
that's right. They just started banning QAnon groups, right? Because
yeah,
I mean, it was great for them. They could get their
yeah, a ton of
eyeballs
money.
on the site. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So was the Boogaloo Boys. It wasn't until they started shooting people that like Facebook said, "Okay, we got to do something about
Hold on.
this."
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you did you ever during this past couple weeks like legitimately worry about uh the change in power or the transition from Biden or from Trump to Biden? Because I know myself, like my partner's from Africa, so she has witnessed coups, and and she has seen different countries. The president just decides not to give up power, and the military backs him. And part of me was like, but there's nothing about America that says the military will just decide to, not support the president and be, totally just a dictatorship now.
Yeah. I wasn't particularly worried that Trump would succeed in his coup, but the fact that he did a coup worries the hell out of me, because, and there's been a number of people who have lived through coups who have written articles to this effect, there's a kind of damage that it does to the idea of free elections, the idea of elections in general, that can't really be undone. And so again, on his way out, he set up a series of dominoes that are going to fall and that are going to, fuck things up. People are going to die. It's going to be bad. The next elections are going to be bad. Every election from here on out, until there's some sort of shift change culturally, is going to be bad, because now the precedent has been set that elections aren't real if your guy loses. Yeah. And you did see bits and pieces of that when Trump won, but not embraced at a high level, right? Not really, not in the same way. And that's bad. Like, I don't care if you're a Marxist-Leninist who thinks that democracy is a bad system. Like, it's certainly not perfect, or a republic or whatever is perfect. Like, it's bad that this has happened. It makes it more dangerous for all of us. It makes it harder to create positive change. It's a bad thing that a bad person did, because all he's ever done is hurt people, because he's trash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a good place to leave it.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all trash. Like, Joe Biden's he is actually a lot better, but he's still trash.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's the difference between, like, Donald Trump is the kind of trash where, like, you left a fucking turkey in the fridge when you went out for, like, a 3-week vacation in Morocco and the power died. And so that turkey was just, like, boiling in, like that's Donald Trump trash. And Joe Biden trash is just like, you fucking, you have, like, your pipes are bad and you can't flush toilet paper, so you've had to fill a bag up with, like, toilet paper that's got shit on it. Like, that's the Joe Biden kind of trash.
Neither of those is good.
Neither of them's good. I would rather take out the shit trash than the rotting turkey, for sure.
Yeah, that's true.
Sure.
Yeah.
But still gross trash in both cases. Yeah.
All right. So I guess thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. It was a good chat. Just in case people who listen to this haven't heard of you before, where can they find you on the internet?
You can find me I have a podcast called Behind the Bastards. You can find it anywhere you can find podcasts. I have a new podcast about the Portland uprising this year called Uprising, a guide from Portland. You can find that also everywhere there are podcasts. And I'm on Twitter at iWriteOK.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you want to find out more from me, you can go to anchor.fm/skepticalleftist. If you want to read the show notes for these episodes, which sometimes are kind of comprehensive, but sometimes they're not, you can go to skepticalleftistpod.wordpress.com. Or if you want to support this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/skepticalleftist. My handle on Twitter is @hardcoreskeptic, and you can find me on Facebook at The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist, or search for one of the million Corey Johnstons that are on Facebook. Thanks, and have a good one.